Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge of the Wanderer and stared at the screen before him. His crew had been mapping this sector for 3 months now, and nothing interesting had happened until today. The energy readings coming from the small moon ahead made no sense at all. Lieutenant Maya Foster checked her instruments again and shook her head. She had been with Daniel for 5 years and trusted her skills completely. When she looked confused, something was definitely wrong. The energy signature pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. It was not like anything in their database. Daniel knew he should report this to command and wait for orders, but something deep inside told him to investigate now. He could not explain the feeling, but it was strong and impossible to ignore. He gave the order to land. The Wanderer descended through thin clouds toward the surface of the moon. As they broke through the atmosphere, Daniel saw ruins spread across the landscape below. Massive structures covered in glowing vines stretched toward the sky. The vines pulsed with blue and green light that matched the rhythm of the energy signature. The landing party consisted of 6 people, including Daniel and Maya. They wore standard exploration suits and carried basic weapons, though Daniel hoped they would not need them. The air outside was breathable according to their scans, so they removed their helmets once the safety check was complete. The ruins were ancient beyond measure. Stone carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly covered every surface. The glowing vines grew through cracks in the walls and seemed to respond to their presence. When Maya walked past one cluster of vines, they brightened and reached toward her like curious fingers. Daniel led his team deeper into the ruins. The path seemed to guide them forward, as if the place itself wanted them to find something. After 20 minutes of walking, he realized Maya was no longer with the group. He called her name through the communication device but received no answer. Panic rose in his chest as the team backtracked to find her. They discovered Maya standing alone in a large circular chamber. She faced a massive archway made of crystal that rose 3 times her height. The archway glowed from within, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Daniel approached her carefully and called her name. She did not respond. Her eyes were fixed on the archway as if hypnotized by its light. He reached out to touch her shoulder, and in that instant the archway flared with brilliant white light. A figure stepped through the light. She was tall and graceful, with features that were almost human but not quite. Her ears came to elegant points and her hair flowed like liquid silver mixed with deep violet. But it was her eyes that captured Daniel completely. They glowed with an inner light like twin stars, ancient and knowing. Around her shoulders coiled a small dragon. Its scales shifted colors from emerald green to sapphire blue with each breath. The creature was no bigger than a large cat, but Daniel could feel the power radiating from it. The dragon watched the humans with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The woman smiled at Daniel. Her smile held sadness and joy and recognition all at once. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that should not have been possible. The sound resonated in his chest and made his bones vibrate. She said the words in perfect English, looking directly into his eyes. "I knew you would return." Daniel felt his heart stop. He had never been to this place before. He had never seen this woman or her dragon in his entire life. Yet something about her felt familiar in a way he could not explain. It was like remembering a dream he never had. He tried to speak, to ask who she was and what she meant. But before any words could leave his mouth, the woman and her dragon dissolved into particles of light. The light swirled in the air for a moment like fireflies, then faded away completely. Something hot fell to the ground at his feet. Daniel looked down and saw a medallion lying on the stone floor. It was made of metal he did not recognize, carved with the same painful symbols that covered the ruins. The medallion glowed with inner fire that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. His hand reached for it before his mind could stop him. The moment his fingers touched the metal, the world exploded into vision. He saw massive warships burning in the darkness of space, worlds consumed by shadow that spread like infection across entire solar systems, armies of creatures that fed on life itself, leaving only dead husks behind. And through it all, he saw himself standing beside the alien woman, her dragon grown to enormous size as they commanded forces against the darkness below. The visions shifted and changed. He saw Earth, but not the Earth he knew. This Earth had cities that reached into the clouds and ships that bent space around them. Humans with glowing eyes fought alongside dragons and other alien species against an enemy that seemed endless. Then came the final vision, The alien woman stood beside a human man who looked remarkably like Daniel. They held hands as a great seal was formed, a barrier of light and thought that wrapped around Earth itself. The man spoke words Daniel could not hear, and then he dissolved into light just as the woman had in the chamber. The woman screamed his name, Marcus. The name echoed through the vision like thunder, Marcus Blackwood. The visions ended with a warning that burned itself into his mind. The devourers are coming. Humanity must remember what was forgotten. The seal will break when it is needed most. You must be ready. Daniel fell to his knees, gasping for air. His team surrounded him with worried faces. Maya helped him stand, asking if he was hurt. He could not answer. The medallion hung from his hand on a chain he did not remember picking up. The ruins around them began to dim. The glowing vines faded to normal plant matter. The archway lost its light and became just carved stone. Whatever power had filled this place was leaving, its purpose apparently fulfilled. Daniel ordered everyone back to the ship immediately. As they walked back through the now dead ruins, he clutched the medallion in his fist. It still felt warm against his skin. The visions played again and again in his mind. Who was the alien woman, and why did she think he would return when he had never been here before? Who was Marcus Blackwood, and why did he look so much like Daniel? What were the devourers, and why were they coming to Earth? Most importantly, what had humanity forgotten that they now needed to remember? The Wanderer lifted off from the moon surface within the hour. Daniel filed his report and included all the sensor data, but he did not mention the visions. He did not know how to explain something he barely understood himself. That night, alone in his quarters, he dreamed of burning worlds and the woman with star-filled eyes. She called him Marcus in the dream. She told him she had waited 10,000 years for his return. She said the war was not over, only sleeping, and soon humanity would have to wake and fight again. When Daniel woke, he knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The peaceful exploration mission he had signed up for was over, or was coming, and somehow he was going to be at the center of it. The medallion on his desk pulsed once with inner light, as if agreeing with his thoughts. 3 months passed since Daniel Brooks found the medallion on that strange moon. He wore it under his uniform now, hidden from sight but always present. The visions came every night in his dreams, burning worlds and shadow creatures that consumed everything in their path. He filed reports with Earth Command, but they seemed more interested in the energy readings than his warnings about an approaching threat. Then the warnings became reality. The attacks began on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. 12 human colonies detected unknown vessels emerging from dead space at the exact same moment. The coordination was impossible to explain. These regions were spread across thousands of light years, yet the enemy appeared everywhere at once. Commander Kate Morrison was having coffee in her office on New Haven Colony when the alarm started screaming. She dropped her cup and ran to the command center. The screen showed contacts appearing on the edge of the system. Lots of contacts, more than her sensors could count accurately. The ships were unlike anything in human records. They looked organic, as if they had been grown rather than built. Dark hulls that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Strange protrusions covered their surfaces like tumors or growths. Kate felt her stomach turn just looking at them. She ordered all defensive stations to battle readiness and sent out evacuation orders for civilians. 40,000 people lived on New Haven, mostly families of miners and researchers. They had maybe 2 hours to get everyone onto transport ships if they were lucky. The enemy fleet moved closer. Kate sent out hails on all frequencies, trying to establish communication. She offered to negotiate, to discuss their presence in human space. The response was silence, cold absolute silence. Then they opened fire. The first defensive platform exploded before Kate could even process what she was seeing. The enemy weapons were some kind of dark energy beam that cut through shields like they were not even there. A second platform died, then a third. Her fleet of 6 patrol ships moved to intercept, but they were badly outnumbered. Kate watched helplessly as the enemy tore through her defenses. The patrol ships fought bravely, but their weapons barely scratched the organic hulls. One ship, the Mercury, managed to land a direct hit with its main cannon. The enemy vessel shuddered but kept coming. It wrapped dark tendrils around the Mercury and began to drain it. Kate watched in horror as her ship withered like a dying plant. Within seconds, nothing remained but a hollow shell that crumbled into dust. The enemy was not just destroying ships. They were consuming them, eating them. Kate knew she was going to lose this battle. The transports were still loading civilians. She needed more time, but time was the one thing she did not have. She ordered her remaining ships to form a defensive line between the enemy and the colony. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Then something impossible appeared on her sensors. A single ship dropped out of hyperspace between her fleet and the enemy armada. It was small compared to the enemy vessels, but it was beautiful. The hull flowed in elegant curves covered with crystalline spires that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns. Kate had never seen a design like it in any human or known alien database. The strange ship stopped moving and just floated there. For a moment, nothing happened. The enemy fleet slowed as if confused by this new arrival. Kate held her breath, wondering if this mysterious newcomer was friend or foe. A bay door opened on the bottom of the crystalline ship. Something massive emerged into the void of space. Kate magnified the image and felt her jaw drop. It was a dragon. Not a small creature like from ancient Earth legends, but a massive beast the size of a Corvette ship. Its scales were deep crimson with gold highlights that seemed to burn with inner fire. Wings that should not work in the vacuum of space spread wide, and yet the creature flew as if it belonged there. On its back sat a rider, though Kate could barely make out details at this distance. The dragon opened its mouth and released a stream of plasma that cut across space like a sword of light. The beam struck the lead enemy vessel and burned straight through its organic hull. The ship exploded in a shower of debris and dark fluid that boiled away in the void. Kate forgot to breathe. She watched as the dragon and its rider tore into the enemy formation with impossible grace. The creature moved like it was swimming through water, dodging enemy fire with ease. Its claws, each as long as a fighter craft, ripped through hulls that her weapons could barely scratch. Every breath brought destruction. Every swipe of its tail sent enemy ships spinning into each other. The enemy fleet tried to adjust, focusing all their fire on this single threat. The dragon simply vanished from one location and reappeared in another, as if it could teleport through space itself. Kate realized this was no ordinary creature. This was something beyond her understanding of reality. Her communication system crackled to life. A voice came through, female and carrying those same impossible harmonics that made her equipment vibrate. The voice spoke in English, clear and calm despite the chaos of battle. The voice identified itself as Lyra and stated that she was here to help. She said the enemy were called Devourers, and this was only their scouting force. The real armada was still gathering, and it numbered in the millions. Humanity needed to remember what they had forgotten and stand together with old allies against this threat. Kate did not understand half of what this Lyra was saying, but she understood one thing clearly. The stranger was saving her colony. She accepted the help without hesitation and asked what Lyra needed from her. Lyra told her to finish the evacuation. She and Stormwing would hold the line. The name Stormwing apparently belonged to the dragon. Kate wanted to argue that one ship and one dragon, no matter how powerful, could not hold against an entire fleet. But before she could speak, 3 more enemy vessels exploded in rapid succession. Kate gave orders to prioritize the evacuation. Her remaining ships fell back to cover the transports while they loaded the last of the civilians. She watched her screens as Lyra and Stormwing fought alone against impossible odds. The dragon was tireless, moving through the enemy formation like a force of nature, but even something that powerful had limits. She saw Stormwing take a hit from multiple enemy beams at once. The dragon roared and the sound transmitted through space somehow, rattling Kate's ship. The creature did not slow down. If anything, it fought harder. Lyra guided her mount with subtle movements, the two working as one perfect unit. 20 minutes later, the last transport lifted off from New Haven. Kate ordered a full retreat. She tried to contact Lyra to tell her they were clear and she could withdraw. The response came immediately. Lyra told her to take the people to safety and spread the word. The Devourers had returned, and humanity needed to awaken its buried potential. Long ago, humans were warriors of legend, allies to her people in a war that spanned galaxies. That war ended with humanity choosing to forget, to seal away their abilities and live in peace. Now the seal must be broken. Kate wanted to ask 1,000 questions. She wanted to know who this woman was and how she knew about human history that no records mentioned. But the enemy was regrouping for another assault and time was running out. Lyra promised they would speak again soon. She said her people, the Etherians, were dying and needed humanity to remember who they truly were. Then the communication cut off as Stormwing unleashed another devastating attack. Kate ordered the retreat to full speed. As her fleet jumped to hyperspace, she looked back at her screens. The last thing she saw was that magnificent dragon, glowing like a star in the darkness, holding the line alone so that 40,000 humans could live. The reports came in over the next few hours. All 12 colonies under attack had received similar help. Dragons appeared from nowhere, each with a rider, and drove back the Devourer scouts. But the message was the same everywhere. This was only the beginning. The real war was coming, and humanity was not ready. Kate sat in her quarters that night, watching recordings of the battle. She focused on the moment when Lyra first appeared. She watched that crystalline ship drop out of hyperspace like an answered prayer. She watched Stormwing tear through the enemy with primal fury, and she wondered what it meant that humanity had forgotten how to fight. She wondered what they had sealed away and why. Most of all, she wondered if breaking that seal was really the answer, or if it would unleash something worse than the Devourers themselves. One thing was certain. The peaceful days of exploration and expansion were over. War had come to humanity's doorstep, and they had no choice but to answer its call. 2 weeks after the attacks, Daniel Brooks received his promotion to admiral and an assignment that seemed impossible to believe. He would lead a delegation to the Etherian homeworld and learn how to awaken humanity from its self-imposed slumber. The journey took 5 days through hyperspace routes that Lyra provided. Routes that human ships had never traveled before and probably could not have found without guidance. When they emerged near Etheria, Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. The planet hung in space like a jewel of impossible beauty, with skies that glowed in permanent twilight colors of purple and deep blue. Massive dragons soared through those skies, their wings creating patterns of light that shifted and changed as they moved. Some were as large as frigate ships, while others were smaller and more agile. All of them radiated power that made his skin tingle even from orbit. The landing took them to a city built among trees so tall they pierced the clouds. The trees themselves seemed alive in a way that went beyond normal plant life. They hummed with energy, and Daniel swore he could almost hear them singing. Lyra met them at the landing platform with Stormwing coiled protectively behind her. The dragon was even more magnificent up close, with scales that reflected light like liquid metal, and eyes that held ancient intelligence. She welcomed them to Etheria and told them the truth that humanity had buried. 10,000 years ago, humans and Etherians had been allies in a war against the Devourers. Humans back then had possessed abilities that seemed like magic, but were actually evolved psychic potential combined with biological enhancements. The war had been brutal and lasted centuries. By the end, both species were exhausted and traumatized by what they had become. Humans had grown so focused on warfare that they lost touch with compassion and peace. They became conquerors and destroyers just like the enemy they fought. A human leader named Marcus Blackwood had worked with the Etherian Council to create the Great Seal. It was a psychic barrier that wrapped around Earth and all human colonies, blocking access to their warrior abilities and erasing memories of the war. Humanity chose peace over power and forgot everything, but the seal had a failsafe built in. If the Devourers ever returned, the seal would begin to weaken and humans would start remembering. The process was slow and painful, designed to give humanity time to adjust. Lyra led Daniel and his team deeper into the city to begin their training. The team consisted of 12 people handpicked for their potential. Pilot Amy Chen, Communications Officer Lisa Martinez, Engineer Paul Henderson, and 9 others from various military backgrounds. The first test was simple. Each human would walk through the Grove of Echoes, a forest of the ancient singing trees. The trees would read their potential and determine if they were compatible with dragon bonding or other abilities. Amy Chen went first. She walked into the grove with visible nervousness but also determination. The trees began to sing louder as she passed, their branches swaying though there was no wind. Suddenly a young dragon emerged from between the trees, its scales shifting from silver to pale gold. The dragon was not much larger than a horse but moved with fluid grace. It approached Amy and touched its snout to her forehead. Both of them gasped at the same moment, and Daniel saw light pass between them. When they separated, Amy had tears streaming down her face and the dragon made a sound almost like purring. Lyra explained that this was Ashwing, a dragon who had been waiting 30 years for the right partner. The bond between dragon and rider was sacred and unbreakable. They would share thoughts, emotions, and even life force. If one died, the other rarely survived long. Lisa Martinez entered the grove next, but she did not bond with a dragon. Instead, she fell to her knees and pressed her hands against the roots of an ancient tree. She stayed there for almost an hour, completely still before finally standing with wonder in her eyes. She could hear the trees singing, not with her ears, but with her mind. They spoke in harmonics that carried information across vast distances. Tactical data, emotional states, even predictions of probable futures based on cosmic vibrations. Lisa had become a listener, a rare gift even among Etherians. Paul Henderson showed different potential. When he entered the grove, the trees guided him to a workshop built into the trunk of the largest tree. Inside, he found tools and materials that should not exist. Star metal harvested from the cores of dying suns, crystals that contained compressed energy, alloys that shifted properties based on user intent. Paul picked up a hammer and felt knowledge flood into his mind. Ancient techniques for forging weapons that could cut through anything. Armor that could absorb and redirect energy. Devices that bent physics itself. He was a maker, able to craft items that combined technology and something beyond science. Over the next 3 weeks, all 12 humans discovered their potential. Some bonded with dragons, while others developed psychic abilities or technical skills that defied explanation. But with each awakening came memories that the seal had hidden. Daniel experienced the worst of it. As the leader, he had the strongest connection to the ancient past and to Marcus Blackwood specifically. He dreamed every night of the old war and what humans had become during those dark centuries. He saw human warriors who showed no mercy, who destroyed entire species because they might become threats. He saw experiments that twisted human genetics into weapons. He saw children trained from birth to kill without hesitation or remorse. He saw the face of Marcus Blackwood, his own face ordering atrocities in the name of survival. The memories made him sick. This was what humanity had been. This was why they chose to forget. They had not sealed away just their abilities, but their shame. Lyra found him one night sitting alone under the singing trees. She sat beside him without speaking for a long time before finally breaking the silence. She told him about Marcus Blackwood, about the man she had loved who carried the weight of the entire human species on his shoulders. Marcus had been a good man who made terrible choices because the war demanded it. He hated what he had become but could not stop because stopping meant extinction. In the end, Marcus had proposed the seal knowing it meant giving up everything, his power, his memories, even his connection to Lyra. He believed that humanity deserved a chance to be better, to grow in peace and rediscover compassion. Lyra had watched him fade away as the seal took hold, erasing himself from history so that future generations could have hope. She had waited 10,000 years, kept alive by the dragon bond and the promise that someday he would return. But Daniel was not Marcus, no matter how much they looked alike or how many memories they shared. He was his own person with his own choices to make. Lyra admitted that she had been unfair to him. She had seen what she wanted to see, her lost love instead of the man standing before her. Daniel deserved better than being a replacement for someone who died millennia ago. Daniel asked the question that haunted him. Should humanity really awaken to this legacy of violence and brutality? Would becoming warriors again just lead them down the same dark path? Lyra had no easy answer. The devourers were coming, and without awakening, humanity would be destroyed. But awakening meant risking the loss of everything that made modern humans worth saving. Their compassion, their creativity, their belief in peaceful solutions. The choice was impossible. Die as they were or survive by becoming something they had deliberately left behind. Amy Chen interrupted their conversation with urgent news. Her bond with Ashwing had given her tactical awareness, and she sensed something wrong. The Devourers were closer than anyone thought. Their main fleet was gathering at the edge of known spacetime had run out for philosophical debates. Humanity needed to make its choice now, and that choice would define what they became for the next 10,000 years. Daniel stood and looked at his team. Amy with her dragon, Lisa hearing songs in the cosmic wind, Paul creating weapons of impossible design, and 9 others finding their own paths to power. They were no longer just human. They had become something new. A bridge between peaceful modern humanity and the warriors of legend. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe they did not have to choose one or the other, but could forge a third path. He made his decision and gave the order. They would return to Earth and begin the awakening, but they would do it their way, keeping their compassion while reclaiming their strength. They would be warriors who fought to protect, not conquer. Lyra smiled at him, and for the first time it was not Marcus she saw but Daniel himself. She told him he was wiser than his ancestor, and maybe that wisdom was exactly what humanity needed to avoid repeating old mistakes. The delegation prepared to depart Etheria, carrying knowledge and abilities that would change everything. The war was coming, but humanity would face it as themselves, not as echoes of a dark past as their ship lifted off. Daniel looked back at the planet with its eternal twilight and singing trees. Somewhere in those memories of violence and shame was also courage and sacrifice. Marcus Blackwood had given up everything, so that future humans could be better. Daniel would honor that sacrifice by proving that strength and compassion could coexist, that humanity could be warriors without losing their humanity. The Devourers would learn that lesson the hard way. The real war was about to begin, and this time humanity would write their own story. The Devourer Armada arrived 2 weeks earlier than predicted. Intelligence had failed to account for their ability to travel through dimensions of space that human science barely understood. When the reports came in, Admiral Daniel Brooks felt his blood turn cold at the numbers. Over 2 million enemy vessels emerging in the Crimson Nebula the following night. Crimson Nebula was a massive region of space where sensor readings became unreliable, and hyperspace travel turned treacherous. Clouds of ionized gas glowed red like blood, creating interference that made long-range scanning nearly impossible. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and the Devourers knew it. United Earth forces gathered every available ship for the defense. The fleet numbered 15,000 vessels ranging from small fighters to massive battleships, but against 2 million enemies it seemed laughably inadequate. Etherian ships joined them, adding another 3,000 vessels with superior technology but still hopelessly outnumbered. Daniel commanded from the flagship Valiant Dawn, a newly constructed dreadnought that incorporated both human and Etherian design. Beside him on the bridge stood Lyra, her presence both comforting and terrifying. Stormwing waited in the hangar bay, too large to fit on the bridge but connected to Lyra through their bond. The dragon cavalry consisted of 50 riders, humans who had bonded with dragons during the training on Etheria. They represented humanity's best hope and biggest gamble. If the cavalry failed, the entire fleet would follow. Chen led the cavalry from the front, her bond with Ashwing stronger than ever. The young dragon had grown substantially in just weeks, now the size of a frigate and still growing. Amy could feel his excitement and fear through their connection, a mixture that mirrored her own emotions. Captain Sophia Blake flew beside Amy on her dragon night scale. The dragon's scales were midnight black with hints of deep purple, and he possessed a unique ability that no other dragon had shown. He could shift out of phase with normal space, becoming temporarily intangible and able to pass through solid matter. The battle plan was desperate but necessary. The cavalry would strike at the Devourer command ships, massive cathedral-sized vessels that coordinated the swarm through psychic links. If they could destroy enough command ships, the enemy fleet would lose coordination and become vulnerable. Lisa Martinez worked her station on the bridge, listening to the cosmic harmonics that the singing trees had taught her to hear. She could sense the enemy fleet's movements before they happened, feeling ripples in probability like a stone thrown into still water. Her predictions gave the fleet precious seconds of warning. Paul Henderson had spent every waking hour forging weapons for the cavalry. Star metal blades that could cut through Devourer hulls, energy lances that channeled dragon fire into focused beams, and armor that adapted to incoming attacks. Every rider carried his creations into battle. The enemy fleet moved into the nebula like a swarm of locusts, their organic ships pulsing with dark energy. They seemed to absorb the red light of the nebula, becoming darker shadows against the bloody clouds. Daniel gave the order and the human fleet advanced to meet them. The first exchange of fire lit up the nebula like a supernova. Human railguns and energy weapons tore into the enemy ranks while Devourer dark beams cut back. Ships on both sides exploded in brilliant flashes that briefly illuminated the red clouds. Daniel watched the tactical display and saw his fleet beginning to buckle under the sheer weight of numbers. For every enemy ship they destroyed, 5 more took its place. This was not a battle. It was a massacre in slow motion. He gave the signal and the dragon cavalry launched. 50 dragons burst from the fleet's carriers and flew into the chaos of battle. They moved with impossible grace, dodging weapons fire that would have vaporized any normal ship. Their riders guided them with thought rather than controls. Human and dragon moving as one perfect entity, Amy felt Ashwing's joy at finally being unleashed. The dragon's instincts were pure combat, honed over millions of years of evolution. He dove toward the nearest command ship, his scales deflecting enemy fire like rain. Amy held on tight and channeled her will through their bond. Ashwing opened his mouth and released a stream of plasma so hot it turned the nebula gas white. The beam struck the command ship's hull and burned straight through, melting metal and organic tissue alike. The massive vessel shuddered and began to list, its coordination signals dying. But the enemy adapted quickly. Smaller devourer ships swarmed around the cavalry, trying to overwhelm them with numbers. Dragons roared and spun, their claws and tails smashing through hulls while their breath weapons carved paths of destruction. Sophia Blake urged Nightscale toward another command ship, but this one was better defended. Dozens of enemy vessels formed a living shield around it, firing continuously. There was no way through without taking lethal damage. Sophia made her choice. She triggered Nightscale's phasing ability, and they shifted out of normal space. The dragon became translucent like a ghost, and they flew straight through the defensive screen without touching it. The enemy fired, but their weapons passed through harmlessly, emerged inside the defensive perimeter, and Nightscale became solid again just long enough to release his breath weapon directly into the command ship's core. The explosion was massive, taking out not just the command ship but half of its defensive screen. The cavalry pressed the attack, destroying command ship after command ship. The enemy fleet began to lose cohesion as their coordination broke down. Individual devourer vessels started making random decisions, attacking targets without strategic purpose. But the cost was terrible. Dragons took hits from massed enemy fire, their armor penetrated by sheer volume of weapons. One rider fell, then another, their dragons keening in anguish as their partners died. The psychic scream of a dying dragon bond could be felt across the entire battlefield. Daniel watched the casualty reports climb and felt sick. They were winning tactically but losing in terms of lives. At this rate, the cavalry would be wiped out before they could finish the job. He needed another option. Lyra gripped his arm and told him about the resonance cascade. By synchronizing the psychic bonds of all remaining dragon riders and channeling it through the ancient Etherian world ships hidden in the nebula, they could create a wave that would disrupt all devourer coordination at once. The price would be enormous. The feedback could kill every rider in the process, including Lyra herself. It would also destroy the world ships, the last remnants of ancient Etherian civilization. But if it worked, it would save the fleet and buy humanity time to prepare for the next attack. Daniel did not want to give that order. He did not want to sacrifice 50 brave people and the woman who had become important to him, in ways he barely understood. But he was an admiral, and sometimes admirals had to make choices that destroyed their souls. He asked the cavalry. Every single rider agreed without hesitation. They knew the risks and accepted them. Amy Chen's voice came through the comm, steady and sure, telling him they were ready to do what was necessary. The world ships emerged from their hiding places deep in the nebula. They were ancient beyond measure, city-sized vessels that predated human civilization by millennia. They moved into formation, creating a sphere with the cavalry at its center. The riders formed up, each dragon touching wingtips with the next, creating a circle of linked bonds. Lyra closed her eyes and began the song, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through every dragon and rider simultaneously. Daniel felt the energy building even from the bridge of Valiant Dawn. Space itself seemed to vibrate with power, as 50 dragon bonds synchronized into one unified force. The world ships amplified that force, channeling it and shaping it into a wave. The Devourers sensed the danger. Their entire fleet turned toward the cavalry, throwing everything they had at stopping the resonance. Thousands of dark beams converged on the sphere of dragons. The cavalry held the line. Dragons roared defiance as enemy fire battered their shields. Riders poured everything they had into maintaining the link even as their bodies began to fail from the strain. One by one, riders started to fall, their consciousness unable to handle the feedback. Sophia Blake saw the wave was not building fast enough. Too many riders were dying before the resonance could complete. She made her decision in an instant and broke from the formation. Nightscale flew straight at the thickest concentration of enemy fire, drawing their attention away from the others. Sophia channeled every ounce of energy she had left through her dragon, and Nightscale became pure light, The dragon exploded outward, not dying but transforming, becoming a shield of psychic energy that wrapped around the entire cavalry formation. Enemy weapons struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly. Sophia's last thought was pride that she had bought her friends the time they needed. The resonance reached critical mass and released. A wave of pure psychic force exploded outward from the cavalry, expanding in all directions at impossible speed. It passed through human and Etherian ships without harming them, but struck the devourers like a hammer. Thousands of enemy vessels went dark simultaneously. Their psychic coordination shattered. They drifted in space like dead things, unable to communicate or coordinate. The remaining devourer ships that were far enough away to avoid the wave immediately began retreating, fleeing into deep space. The battle was won, but the cost. 3 months passed since the Battle of Crimson Nebula, and humanity stood at a crossroads unlike any in its history. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the attacks began, people dared to hope they might actually survive. Admiral Daniel Brooks spent those months overseeing reconstruction efforts while dealing with changes within himself that he still barely understood. The awakening had not stopped with the trained riders and specialists. It was spreading across human space like ripples in a pond. Children were being born with abilities their parents could not explain. Some could move objects with their minds, while others could sense emotions or see probable futures. The seal that Marcus Blackwood had created 10,000 years ago was not just weakening, it was breaking completely. Hospitals reported cases of adults suddenly developing enhanced reflexes or heightened awareness. Construction workers lifted weights that should have been impossible. Pilots flew with instincts that seemed almost precognitive. Humanity was evolving whether they wanted it or not. Daniel visited Lyra often in the medical facility on New Haven. The colony had been rebuilt after the first attack, and now served as a joint human-Etherian base. Lyra was recovering slowly, her body healing but her connection to Stormwing remaining damaged in ways no one fully understood. The great dragon had survived, but something fundamental had changed in their bond. Stormwing no longer recognized Lyra as his rider, confused by her diminished psychic presence. It was like she had become a stranger to him after 30 years of perfect unity. The pain of that rejection showed in her eyes every day. Daniel found her sitting in the Etherian Gardens, a small grove of singing trees that had been transplanted from their homeworld. She looked up as he approached and smiled, but it was a sad smile that did not reach her eyes. He sat beside her without speaking at first, simply sharing the quiet and listening to the trees hum their eternal songs. Lyra finally broke the silence and asked how he was handling his new responsibilities. Daniel had become not just a military commander, but a symbol of humanity's transformation. He admitted he felt overwhelmed most days. People looked to him for answers he did not have, asking if the awakening was good or dangerous, if they should embrace their new abilities or fear them. Daniel was still figuring that out himself. Lyra told him about Marcus Blackwood again, but this time her voice held no longing for the past. She spoke about how Marcus had carried impossible burdens and made choices that haunted him until his final moments. She had loved him despite his flaws, perhaps because of them. She said Daniel reminded her of Marcus not because they looked alike or shared memories, but because they both understood that leadership meant accepting responsibility for decisions that had no right answers. Marcus had chosen peace at the cost of power, and Daniel was choosing to reclaim power while trying to keep peace. Daniel asked if she thought they were making the right choice. Lyra looked at the singing trees and listened to their harmonics before answering. She said there were no right choices in war, only necessary ones, and humanity was doing what it must to survive. He reached out and took her hand. She looked surprised but did not pull away. Daniel told her he was grateful she had waited 10,000 years, even if it was for someone else, because if she had not been there to help humanity awaken, they would all be dead now. Lyra squeezed his hand and admitted she had been unfair to him, seeing him as a replacement for Marcus instead of his own person. She was learning to let go of the past and live in the present, something that was harder for someone who had lived millennia. They sat together watching the alien sunset paint New Haven's sky in colors that Earth never produced. It was a moment of peace in the midst of chaos, and both of them treasured it, knowing such moments were rare. Meanwhile, Amy Chen had become the youngest dragon commander in the newly formed Joint Defense Force. Her bond with Ashwing had strengthened during the battle, and the dragon had grown to become one of the largest and most powerful among the cavalry. She trained the next generation of dragon riders, humans who came from every corner of known space, hoping to bond with the young dragons that were being born at an accelerating rate. It seemed the dragons sensed humanity's need and were responding by breeding more frequently. Ashwing had become protective of Amy in ways that went beyond their bond. He saw her as his responsibility and would not let anyone he deemed threatening get close. It made diplomatic meetings complicated when a building-sized dragon loomed over proceedings. Lisa Martinez headed the new Psychic Warfare Division, using her ability to hear cosmic harmonics to predict enemy movements and coordinate fleet actions. She had recruited dozens of other listeners, people who developed similar abilities as the seal broke down. Her work was crucial, but also controversial. Many people feared the idea of psychic surveillance, even when directed at enemies. Lisa walked a careful line between using her abilities effectively and respecting human privacy and dignity. Paul Henderson continued forging weapons and tools for the war effort, but he had expanded his focus to include civilian applications. He created building materials that could adapt to environmental stress, medical devices that accelerated healing, and communication systems that worked across vast distances instantly. His workshop had grown into a full research facility where human and Etherian scientists worked together. They were not just preparing for war, but also building a future where both species could thrive. But not everyone was happy with humanity's transformation. A political movement had emerged, calling themselves the Peacekeepers, led by Senator Claire Hughes from the Mars colonies. They argued that awakening humanity's warrior nature was a mistake that would lead to the same brutality that necessitated the seal. Originally, Senator Hughes gave speeches warning about the dangers of psychic abilities and genetic enhancement. She pointed to cases where newly awakened humans had accidentally hurt others with uncontrolled powers. She demanded legislation to suppress abilities and ban dragon bonding. Daniel found himself in heated debates with her, trying to explain that the awakening was not something they could stop even if they wanted to. The seal was breaking, and humanity had to learn to control their abilities rather than suppress them. The debates became public spectacles watched by billions. Some people agreed with Hughes, fearing what humanity might become. Others supported Daniel, believing survival required adaptation. Human society was fracturing along ideological lines. Then intelligence reports changed everything. Long-range sensors detected massive movement in deep space beyond the galactic rim. The Devourers were gathering again, building an armada that would make the Crimson Nebula fleet look insignificant by comparison. The estimates were terrifying. Over 10 million vessels massing for an assault that would hit every major human world simultaneously. Without the element of surprise that helped at Crimson Nebula, humanity would be fighting on hundreds of fronts at once. Daniel called an emergency council with military leaders, political representatives, and Etherian advisors. The room fell silent as he presented the intelligence. Even Senator Hughes looked shaken by the numbers. He told them the time for debate was over. They could continue arguing about philosophy and ethics after they survived, but right now they needed unity. Every ship, every rider, every awakened human needed to stand together, or they would all fall separately. To his surprise, Senator Hughes agreed. She did not abandon her concerns about the awakening, but she acknowledged that survival took priority. She pledged the full support of the Peacekeeper movement to the war effort, with the understanding that after victory they would address her concerns. The Council approved emergency measures to accelerate military production and rider training. Shipyards worked around the clock building vessels that combined human and Etherian technology. Volunteers lined up by the thousands hoping to bond with dragons or develop other abilities. Daniel stood on the observation deck, a valiant dawn 6 weeks later, watching the construction of the new planetary defense network. Massive orbital platforms armed with weapons that could shatter moons ringed every major world. Lyra joined him, walking without assistance for the first time since the battle. Her Recovery was progressing, and while she would never regain her full power, she was learning to accept her new limitations. She stood beside him and watched the preparations. The fleet had grown to over 30,000 ships, with more launching every day. The dragon cavalry numbered 200 riders, with another 300 in training. Humanity had become a military power that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Daniel asked if she thought it would be enough. Lyra watched a young dragon practicing aerial maneuvers with its rider and smiled. She said the Devourers were expecting to face the weak and peaceful humans who first encountered them, not warriors who remembered their strength. The enemy was in for a very unpleasant surprise. A sensor operator called out contacts on the edge of the system. Devourer scouts had arrived, watching and assessing the defenses. Daniel did not order an attack. He wanted them to see what humanity had become and report back to their masters. Let the Devourers know that humanity was ready this time. Let them understand that the species they tried to consume had teeth and claws of their own now,